There were two men in a certain city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. He brought it up, and it grew up with him and with his children. It used to eat at his meagre fare, and drink from his cup, and lie in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveller to the rich man, and he was loath to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the wayfarer who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared that for the guest who had come to him. Well, it's never easy to speak truth to power, is it? I'm not sure if you've ever been in a situation anything like Nathan was in, where you've had to really challenge someone who has power over you. But I definitely imagine Nathan having many, many sleepless nights, trying to imagine how he's going to confront his king, how he's going to tell David that he's done the wrong thing and that God is judging him, and at the same time do that in a way where he has any chance whatsoever of leaving the palace with his head still attached to the rest of his body. And we know that he's a genuine prophet of God, or at least a very, very intelligent man, because he does come up with a plan that just might work. He comes up with a story that has the power to draw David to condemn himself before Nathan actually has to condemn him. Storytelling has this power. And in the Gospels, we see Jesus doing this all the time, don't we? Using stories to get into people's heads. His hearers absorb the story and then ask themselves who they identify with. Perhaps if it's the Good Samaritan story, we might, one time we hear it, we might identify with the traveller, beaten up and left bleeding on the side of the road, not helped, not supported by the people we always thought would be there for us. Or another time we hear it, we might see something in ourselves of the Samaritans, of the Pharisees, who find excuses to pretend nothing's happening and just walk straight past. Or another time we hear it, we might see that actually sometimes we are that person who, despite being the outsider, finds the courage to walk straight through those boundaries and offer the support that stranger needs, and finds that the way to bind up those wounds and pay for the care that is needed. Stories have power to get into our heads and our hearts and begin a work of deep transformation. Today is the day in the church calendar when we remember the life of William Wilberforce and others who worked to abolish the transatlantic slave trade. These people worked relentlessly in political and legal systems and ought to be honoured for that work. But real transformation happens at many levels, not just at the level of law and policy, but also at the level of thought and feeling, head and heart. And so we can also remember that on the other side of the Atlantic, While slavery was still a very brutal part of life in the southern states of America, a law passed in 1850 that shocked and depressed abolitionists in the northern states and those still fighting for abolition in the South. The Fugitive Slave Act made it illegal to give refuge or assistance in the northern states to any person who had escaped slavery in the South. Now, there was a gifted writer who was part of a community of Christian activists and academics who were all working together and discussing how they might oppose what the government was doing. One of her friends urged her, "If I had your gift, I would pick up my pen and do something about this." Well, she did pick up her pen, and she didn't write a political speech or a theological treatise on slavery, though I suspect that she was perfectly capable of doing either of those things. Instead, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, a work of fiction which has done more to change hearts and minds about slavery than any political speech or theological treatise. Stories are not just stories. They have power to get inside us, to transform us as we identify with the characters and begin to see the world from a different perspective. The story Nathan told worked inside David until he was able to condemn himself. "The man who has done this deserves to die," he said. And so all Nathan needed to do was to say, "You are that man." This was a powerful story. This story also showed David that sin is not about breaking the rules. Sin is about breaking relationship. And isn't this something that Jesus emphasized all the time? When Jesus was asked about the greatest commandment, what did he say? "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and you shall love your neighbour as yourself." Obeying God is not about having a big to-do list and perhaps even bigger not to-do list. It's about love, loving God, loving people. If David had initially been presented with a list of transgressions, he might have justified each action. Or he might probably more likely have apologised and promised, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'll never do that again." Either way, the focus would have been on his actions and not on his heart. But his heart was the problem. His heart was what needed to change, not just his behaviour. A list of transgressions was not going to touch his heart, but a story, a really good story, just might. So let's take a look at these two characters in this story. A poor man loves a little ewe lamb and treats her like a favourite daughter. She drinks from his cup and sleeps in his arms. I kind of imagine him dressing her in a tutu and dancing her around the house and, teaching her to do tricks and kind of a little bit crazy. And that's part of the charm of the story. Love can be a little bit crazy. It doesn't keep within reasonable limits. It doesn't care about looking dignified. Love focuses on the other and doesn't care what the neighbours might think. This poor man just loves his little ewe lamb. And then there's the rich man. He has a visitor and he's too stingy to feed that visitor from his own extensive supplies. And so, there's just no love in this man's heart, no generosity at his table, no hospitality in his home. This man had a lot of stuff, but where it really matters, in his relationships, he is utterly destitute. And out of the deadness and coldness of his heart, he does the unthinkable. He takes this treasured little ewe lamb from the poor man and kills her and serves her to his guest. So we have two people, one who is deeply alive with loving relationship and he's happy even though he's poor and possibly a little bit crazy, and the other who is strong and secure in his wealth but is completely dead inside. Two characters, two ways to live. Life can sometimes feel as though these are our two options. Our hearts call us to love recklessly, without counting the cost. But this world can be a cold and hard place sometimes, and people who follow their hearts can sometimes get crushed, just as this poor man was crushed. And fear of being crushed can make us hesitate. It can sometimes feel as though the only alternative is to become like the rich man, to strangle our heart until we care about nothing but holding on to what we have. This is a choice between life and death. And it is not an easy choice. It is a scary choice. Love on the one hand, fear and death on the other. We can follow the path of reckless love and risk getting stomped on. Or we can let fear strangle our heart so that we become the sort of people who stomp on others. Now, I know most of us find a place to live somewhere between those two options, but every now and then something happens that scares us and calls us to make a choice, to move in one direction or the other. And it's so easy to drift towards fear. This story is not just about David. It's about all of us. About the struggle to be fully human, fully alive and loving in a world that does not always feel safe. Nathan used this story to hold a mirror up to David, to show him that he had become the rich man, cold and dead inside. And still, 3,000 years later, this story holds a mirror up to us. And it asks us, are you the rich man? Or are you willing to be the poor man? David was the rich man. And there was no simple solution to that. If your heart is dead, what you need is a new heart. That's why the psalm says, create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit in me. Over the last little while, I've had a couple of biopsies on my arm to see if a melanoma that I had removed a few years ago has returned. It's okay, all is well. Everything's returned, the tests have come back negative. But it has taken my mind back to that time, and I'm sure that a lot of you have been through similar and much, much, much worse encounters with cancer. And so you'll know that time between diagnosis and surgery, when you know that you have that little bit of death sitting there inside your body, and all you want is just to say to that doctor, just get it out. Just get it out right now. I don't want it there. And that's what that prayer is. Get that heart of stone out of me, God, right now. I don't want death in me. Give me a living heart, a soft heart, a heart that is capable of love. The surgery on my arm 3 years ago was a little complicated and left me with a rather large scar in the fairly distinct shape of the letter R. And I've actually grown quite fond of it. It's not that it's at all attractive, but I've grown quite fond of it because I remember sitting with a friend, with Pam, a beautiful member of a parish that I was leading in Victoria at the time. And I said to Pam that since I was going to be having to live with this scar for the rest of my life, I might as well think of it as a tattoo and as something that had meaning. So given that it was a letter R, what meaning might I give to it? And so we sat together and listed some wonderful words that start with the letter R. Renewal, regeneration, restoration, recreation, repentance. The deep surgery that happens when we ask God to remove our heart of stone and give us a new heart is painful. But there is beautiful new life on the other side. Life of renewal, recreation, restoration. But in that story, not all of us identify with the rich man. Some of us are the poor man, victims of injustice and exploitation. People who have been fully alive with crazy, reckless love and have had that beautiful thing or person torn from them. Now, what does the story say then? Well, for a start, it tells us that God is on the side of that poor man, that God delights in crazy, reckless love, and God sees the injustice and will do something about it. In fact, if we look at that story in the light of the whole biblical narrative, we see that God is not just on the side of the poor man, God is the poor man. The little ewe lamb represents Israel, and through Israel, all of humanity. God chose us and brought us right into God's heart, God's house, God's table. God protects us and loves us with crazy and reckless love beyond the craziest of human love. And ultimately, God does the craziest and most reckless thing by actually becoming one of us, dying for us, by actually becoming the little ewe lamb that is sacrificed. Just crazy, reckless. That's the love that we need. That's the story that I want to be listening to. There are so many stories out there about how I need to be strong and powerful and rich, or else I'll get stomped on, or the people I love will get stomped on and I won't be able to protect them. The thing is, stories are powerful. We need to be careful what stories we listen to. I'm going to choose to listen to stories about crazy, reckless love and about God who becomes tiny and vulnerable and holds hands with our vulnerability and carries little baby lambs like us through death into resurrection life. Amen.